Hi, everyone. We are going to get started in 1 minute. Just want to give folks a moment before we begin. All right, everyone, we are going to get started. So welcome again to the University of Maryland Disability Summit, and welcome to this presentation, Hidden Disability, Seeking Support and Understanding for Endometriosis in an Online Community, with our amazing presenter, Jessica Chaikof. So welcome, Jessica. Again, sponsored by the College of Computer, Mathematical, and Natural Sciences. So my name is Jeremy. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a white man with a beard and glasses, wearing a white shirt with a collar with some flowers on it. I commented before that I'm sitting in what normally looks like a red chair, but with this light, for me, it looks a little green. I'm in front of a white wall with a window with some light coming through and a little rectangle painting with a brown trimming on it. So we're going to get started in a second. Just want to encourage folks to use your social media. If you would like to, you can share your experience at the summit by utilizing the hashtags on whatever media platform you use, hashtag #DisabilityUMD, hashtag 2021 Disability Summit, or of course, and at UMD Disability S1. So I'm moving now to the next slide. On this next slide, it's just to let you know, and it says this session is being recorded. Pursuant to Maryland law, we are required to provide verbal or visual notification of recording. If you continue to participate after being notified that the activity is being recorded, we're understanding that your consent to recording is implied. And finally, accessibility services for this session. So we have American Sign Language ASL interpreter video is going to be displayed at all times during the entire session. We encourage you to pin the video, or also, you can pin the video or also remove interpreters from the screen. For a better experience, we recommend you to use a desktop device versus kind of a mobile app. And finally, cart service can be enabled by selecting the closed captioning feature located on the bottom bar within the Zoom webinar to enable live caption within Zoom, or on your own device by selecting the link in the chat. Please pose all questions to the chat. We're going to select a representative of those questions, and basically we'll just answer them as much as we can with the time we have left after the presentation. And now I again would like to welcome Jessica Chaikof to introduce and just describe yourself before beginning your presentation. And then just if you have any slides, just to please describe them as we're going through. So I'm going to close out my screen and welcome Jessica.
Hi everyone, let me just screen share in just a minute. Hi everyone, I am Jessica Chaikof. I am a white woman with brown hair. I am currently a master's student in the Sociology Research and Practice program at American University. So thank you all so much for giving me the opportunity to be here today, or virtually at least, at the Disability Summit. I'm very excited. So similar to other chronic conditions, endometriosis is a hidden disability that disrupts multiple aspects of a person's life. But unlike other chronic conditions, it is gendered and very much so affects mostly women. And so to better support women living with endometriosis. We need to understand their experiences. And so my presentation is Hidden Disability, Seeking Support and Understanding for Endometriosis in an Online Community. I began my research by asking two key questions. The first one, how do women with endometriosis use Facebook to share their experiences with endometriosis? Second, what words, phrases, or images do they use to convey those experiences? So let's get us all on the same page on what endometriosis is. So endometriosis is defined as the presence of endometrial tissue found outside of uterus. On our right is a diagram which has a blue background with a pink uterus. And you can see a red arrow pointing. What the arrows are pointing to is these red spots, which is the endometrial tissue. And so what happens during the menstrual cycle, or when a woman gets her period, is this tissue will bleed into places it can't escape, which leads to episodic symptoms of pain. Endometriosis affects more than 11% of American women between ages of 15 and 44 years. In addition, since endometriosis is a hidden disability, women living with this condition can occupy an in-between space where they have a choice to identify as disabled or non-disabled. So here's a couple theories and concepts I use to guide my research. The first one is from Webb Du Bois, a Black American sociologist who was studying issues of racism during the 20th century. So this concept that Du Bois came up with was a veil. So during the 20th century, and still very much so today, Black Americans want to be seen as both Black and as an American in the eyes of society, but unfortunately, they were only seen as Black. And so they experienced this veil, which is described as an invisible curtain that establishes two separate realities. And so Du Bois says, then it dawned upon me with a certain suddenness that was different from the others, like mayhap in heart and life and longing, but shut out from the world by a vast veil. And so by disclosing their disability, women with endometriosis are forced to embrace two different identities and realities, a disabled one and another in which their disability is hidden and they're supposedly not. In addition, when they are discriminated on the basis of their disability, they must accept the reality of not being fully accepted into an able-bodied society, which leads to this double conscious, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others. So always thinking about how they're viewed in others' eyes. The next one, stigma, is from Irene Goffman, a Canadian sociologist. So Irene Goffman described stigma as attributes that make people perceive themselves or others as discreditable or as moral failures. Stigmatized individuals are unsure in how they will be received based on their stigma. Since society has normalized the pain from endometriosis as women's problems or as period pain, women are more likely to judge and hide this discreditable function, the pain, in shame because they're unable to cope with it in the same way as every other woman. And so to further emphasize the stigma, I want to share this meme, but I think it's pretty funny. It says, when people think endometriosis is just a bad period, and what it includes is a cat cartoon making a side eye, saying, when people think endometriosis is just a bad period. In reality, we know that is not the case. Methodology. For my research, I chose to do a digital infographic fieldwork method. So when people post videos, photos, memes, status, or comments, they leave behind online traces. So anything you post online publicly becomes publicly available data. I received a permission from a group administrator of an online endometriosis group on Facebook to join and to participate. And throughout the group, I made it clear I was a researcher. I said I was a student at American University, interested in studying endometriosis and the lived experiences. About 1.5 to 2 hours each day were spent observing and participating in the different interactions throughout the group. This project was started as part of my qualitative methods research course I took last semester. After collecting all my data and field notes, I coded in and sorted it all out on Excel into different categories and themes, and came up with 3 major themes. So the first one is mental and physical health challenges. So endometriosis is a debilitating condition, and many of the people living this condition are desperate for relief and are begging for some kind of treatment that not only does not exist, but are aware of it. And so often they're like, we know this issue comes from endometriosis, but do you have anything to help me? And so some of the challenges that people have to deal with include fatigue, brain fog, dietary, pain in general, digestion, bowels, and so on. So here's a small snippet of a quote from a post about digestion and bowel issues. And it says, always, I also never get any help for it. It's always, oh yeah, that's expected endo. Okay, but can you help me? Is what this post is saying is I know it's from endometriosis. I know it is, but you do have anything to help me. And usually that's not always the case. In addition, endometriosis takes an incredibly long time to diagnose. For example, a participant got her period at a young age and for years asked doctors if her pain was normal, the heavy bleeding. It eventually became unbearable in her early 20s and took her over a year just to find a doctor that would take her seriously. And since the pain has been normalized by society, women are not always taken seriously by their doctors. And so there's this gap in trust between patients and doctors. And so women with endometriosis are forced to deal with 2 different realities, where one in which are supposedly healthy and another in which they are not, and they're living with this pain. And so the stigmatization of endometriosis has left them with only 1 or 2 different choices. They can either disclose and get help, but deal with the stigma from having endometriosis, or not disclose and not get help and not deal with stigma from endometriosis. Here is a meme. I am not going to describe it all because there's tons of tiny little bits and pieces of text. But I want us to focus on the very first sentence on the top of the meme in white. It says, I am over this fatigue. It is debilitating, overwhelming, and beyond frustrating. And inside the meme is a bunch of different quotes. And what it's saying is, here's some of the challenges we're dealing with, and this is why it's a really difficult condition to have. And so understanding and managing symptoms is the next theme. Since there's a trust gap between doctors and patients, women with endometriosis have used this group as a space to solicit advice, provide information on research, healthcare providers, treatments, and to also support each other as they deal with this illness, and also to make one another feel validated. So this quote is about fatigue. It says, it can't just be me that constantly feels fatigue. I can sleep for numerous hours, but still wake up with pains and exhaustion. Please tell me this is normal. And so what this quote is saying is this normal? Am I what I'm dealing with normal? And in this post, there were multiple responses, comments, and likes saying, yes, unfortunately, this is normal for endometriosis. This participant was able to feel validated in their experiences and know that what they were going through was normal for the condition and that others understood them. And in this group, women can feel safe because A, they don't have to worry about being stigmatized, viewed differently, or discriminated due to a disability that is hidden, but also gendered. Here's an example of two posts summarizing this understanding and managing symptoms. The first one on our left includes a meme that's like a black and white photograph. It says 86% of women with endometriosis suffer from depression. And in this post, there's information on depression, facts, and research. On our right is a picture of foods, and it says foods to beat fatigue. And what this includes is information on dietary supplements, foods to avoid or to try in order to combat the fatigue due to endometriosis. The next theme is disease as part of identity. And so women with endometriosis have chosen to embrace their body experiences because they want to be recognized not only as individuals, but they want their condition acknowledged. So here's a small snippet of a quote encompassing this. It says, "But I'm going to conquer. Endo does not define me." And throughout the group, I found multiple hashtags saying endometriosis awareness, endometriosis warrior, endo sister, and so on. And so each of these hashtags in this quote are all saying this disease is a part of me. It doesn't define me. I just want you to know it's there. So here's an example of a few images and memes I found. The first one on our left is a picture of a bruised up stomach. And it says, try surviving in a body that wants to destroy you. It isn't easy trying to survive when you're physically destructing from inside out. Hashtag endometriosis. In the middle is a purple sweatshirt in front of a white background that says, don't let, includes a yellow ribbon, endometriosis, dull your sparkle. On our right is a quote that says, your illness does not define you. Your strength and courage does. At Endo Fighter. And so what each of these images are saying is this condition is part of us, but doesn't define us, but we're choosing to embrace it because it needs to be acknowledged. And the last one I want to focus on is this image about describing endometriosis in one sentence. I am not going to read the entire image, but I want us to focus on the bottom, which is a picture of a woman's stomach, and you can see some bloods of where her uterus is supposed to be. And it says, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Hashtag endometriosis. And so what this image is summing up is just because you can't see the pain, it does not mean it isn't real, it isn't there, is what this image is saying. Conclusions and takeaways. There's a trust gap between patients and doctors. Women do not feel that their doctors understand or listen to them. And so online spaces are key in providing support and information. Endometriosis is a hidden disability because the pain has been normalized by society. And so we need more awareness of the condition. Future areas of research I'm hoping to pursue. So right now, I am interested in issues of accessibility and disability in higher education. So I'm hoping to identify gaps in higher education due to endometriosis. and think about how can universities be more accommodating to students of chronic illnesses such as endometriosis. In addition, think about the ways in which reproductive conditions affect women in the classroom, the workplace, social life are ignored, such as menopause. Thank you very much for listening. I will happily now take any questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation, Jessica. So I think we're going to go ahead and yes, we will start with questions. So to the audience, if you have any questions that are coming up for you, please put them in the chat. We're organizing them and making sure we can get them to the presenter. So our first question, did you find that people with endo seek out these online communities for validation of their embodied experiences? Since as you mentioned, they are consistently invalidated in medical settings. And then the second part of that is, are there instances of self-diagnosis in these spaces?
Okay, so could you repeat the first part of the question?
So the first part of the question is, did you find that people with endo seek out these online communities for validation of their experiences? As you mentioned, they are consistently invalidated in medical settings.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely agree. People were often seeking out spaces to seek validation. One of the things I did before starting my research is that I did a quick search on the different endometriosis online support groups on Facebook. And I found multiple groups for different categories, for people of color, for transgender. And they often in this group did make self-diagnosis, because the thing is, this condition takes an incredibly long time to diagnose. And in these spaces, people can get their questions answered, get validated. And to quote an article I read, I believe it's from Kate Ciara, is that they said, getting a diagnosis is a crucial moment in a woman's illness trajectory or journey, because it gives an access to all this information that is not created by the healthcare provider, but created by people with this condition.
And the second part of this question was, are there instances of self-diagnosis in these spaces?
I did not see any of that in this group at all. So I unfortunately cannot answer that question.
Okay. Well, moving on to the next question we have here. Did you have any interactions with transmasculine folks, transmasculine people with endometriosis, and any ideas of additional barriers for folks in this community?
So I have not had any interactions with transmasculine or transgender folks with endometriosis. That's something I have been thinking about, because that is definitely a condition that can be found in transgender males. And I do think about some of the barriers, because transgender still very much so today is stigmatized, even though in society we shouldn't. But I would also think that there's not as many support spaces available for those people.
The next question we have here is, I'm wondering if you can say, okay, so I always wonder about language that suggests that a disability does not define a person. I'm wondering if you can say a bit more about this language and whether there's discussion about the phrase in these, and like if there's discussion about this phrase in the groups that you are witnessing. This is about when the language of disability does not define a person.
Okay, so from one of the articles I read in doing my research, is that unlike other disabilities with chronic illnesses, is they're episodic in the sense that they are only active when they're active. And when I was reading the ADA, chronic illnesses were not explicitly mentioned. And so that was something I found to be very interesting. But also, some people are like, okay, this is a medical condition, but I don't see this as a disability. I still see myself as a person. And the thing I often like to emphasize, also as a person with a disability myself, I do not have endometriosis, is that how one chooses to define themselves should not matter, because we all have our own different experiences in understanding disability, because it's not a monolith. But I definitely want to emphasize the fact in this group, people either chose to define themselves as disabled or not disabled. I hope that answers your question.
All right, the next question we have here is recognize that many doctors do not recognize or treat for endometriosis. Is there an online resource that shares contact information of a coalition of doctors or medical professionals across the country who can help? So I think that question is really asking us about like, yeah, what resources are there out there to find a professional that will support someone with endometriosis?
Absolutely. So in this group, I remember hearing about one of those resources that was frequently mentioned, and it was called Nancy's Nook. So it's Nancy, and it's Nook, so it's NOOK. And so it's this group, or I would say resource that provided listings of doctors, like where to find one. So that was one I saw throughout the group. And also in the group, there was a pinned post that says, if you're looking for a doctor, please go to Nancy's Nook.
Okay, hold on. I'm so sorry. I suddenly lost my questions. So just want to bring back a comment that was just coming back to the question of these spaces with trans folks. Someone else in the comments commented that they were also wondering about that, and from the experiences of some close to them, the support spaces for endometriosis are more cis women centric and are not necessarily welcoming to those with trans or queer identities. Just wanted to amplify that comment within our chat that's going on. At this moment, so I just want to encourage folks that if you have any more questions, now's the time. We have about 5 minutes left. So remember, all sessions are going to be recorded, and the planning committee is going to inform everyone when those are sent out. So keep that in mind, that if there's anything you felt like you may have missed or something you want to revisit, the recordings with the slides are going to be shared with everybody. But yeah, just want to ask if anyone has any more questions to please put them in the chat so we can try and get as many addressed by Jessica while we have the time. Oh, interesting question. So Jessica, Facebook is somewhat notorious for its ability to spread misinformation. And so did you find any instances of misleading info in the group? And if so, how did the group control it? And I would maybe expand that to any other sort of social media places, but let's start with Facebook and particularly where your research was at.
Yes, so that is definitely very true, Fran. I agree. Facebook is a spreader of misinformation. So I can't really speak for misinformation, but I will speak about an incident I dealt with in the group. There was an incident where someone posted this really racist meme, which I will not say or describe because it was really racist. And I just remember being like, oh my God, this is not okay. And one of the things that I noticed was that multiple people in the group liked it, except for one person who called out and said, this is racist, but it was not taken down or removed. I should also emphasize this is one group of many groups. One of the things I am hoping to do this summer, I'll be working with my advisor, Dr. Michelle Newton-Francis, on further exploring this and seeing how it works in other groups. But to sort of answer your question, I did not see them remove any of that information, even though that meme was racist and in some ways spreading misinformation about this condition.
So really speaking to some of the need for there to be more monitoring in some of these groups too that you were observing. So I'm noticing also some more resources that are being put in the chat. I know earlier someone pasted Nancy's Nook, and we're seeing a comment about that. The Endometriosis Foundation of America is another great organization that helps promote awareness of endo through different means and educating young women in K through 12 and raising funds for research purposes. Jessica, do you have any reflections? This may be a good kind of finalist question. Do you have any reflections on being in this group as a researcher and somebody without endometriosis? So I think how your experience of coming into this group and just what that was like for you. What are your reflections on that?
So that's actually a very good question. So thank you for that. So one of the reasons why I chose to study endometriosis is one of my really close friends in undergrad had the condition, and she's this really brilliant person. And she could do so much, but one of the troubles she had was that her professors weren't always accommodating to her condition. And one of the things I think about in this group was that it was really hard to relate to their experiences because even though I had the background knowledge, what my friends had told me, but I was not someone living with endometriosis. So I couldn't say, I understand exactly what you're going through or what you're living with. And so that was a really major challenge. But also, one of the things I think about is what my professor often likes to tell me is you don't have access until you have access. And what she meant by that is just because you're in a space doesn't mean you have all that access to that knowledge. And I remember there was questions I posted in a group such as, have you found a professor or a teacher you trust to talk about this with? And I remember noticing that I didn't get as many comments on some of that information or that post. And one of the comments I got was from somebody saying, I don't want to talk about it. And so what it involved in me as a researcher was be really patient and try to think about how can I work with this group with a disability that I do not have myself. So thank you for that question.
Well, thank you, Jessica. So I think just because of time, we do have to wrap up. So again, thank you so much for presenting and sharing this data and this research, and really a huge thank you to everyone who's participating and putting in some really excellent questions. We are going to have to move on now and take a break before the next session. But again, just appreciations for Jessica and your presentation. Thank you so much.